Hi, I'm Sumit Bose, and this is the Net Hero podcast. Who's it for? It's for you. If you care about the planet and you care about business. We believe that businesses are responsible for a lot of the damage that has been done to the planet, but they're also responsible for finding the solutions. We need innovation, we need ideas, we need people who are trying to make a difference, and that's what this podcast is about. If you know someone who is trying to make a change, then get them to come along on the podcast. Listen in every week, subscribe, and make sure that you follow us on social media. Our two news platforms, Energy Live News and Future Net Zero, cover everything we do. And this episode is recorded live, so enjoy. I was about to book my summer holiday. Well, should I? You can see what's going on right now. If you live in the UK, or frankly, if you live anywhere in the world, everyone is worried about the cost of jet fuel because of the Iran war. So it's leading to more and more companies. Lufthansa recently saying it was going to ground thousands of flights. And then you've had pushback from government saying, no, don't worry, there's no problem. But the EU itself admitted that across Europe in particular, there could be a fuel shortage. Over the last, probably I'd say 5-6 years, maybe a little bit longer, but definitely the last 5-6 years, you probably have heard of SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuel. People have been talking about this as a way of trying to clean up our skies. But is there another version of this? Is there a way of getting sustainable fuels from biological sources, which would mean you don't have to worry about things like massive price fluctuations in the price of oil and gas? Well, there's a company that is trying to do something in that field, and I'm delighted to say that its boss joins me today. Felix Lethworthy is the co-founder of a company called ET Fuels or ET Fuels. How do you call it?
ET Fuels.
Not ET Come Home. How do you do that?
We do get that a lot, but yeah.
I was going to say. Nice to meet you, Felix. Thanks for joining me on the podcast. Very quickly, for people who don't know what sort of e-fuels are, it's a new term. I think a few people have probably heard it. But what's your interpretation? Because some people give me one idea of what it is and others are different. So I'd like to know what you consider an e-fuel, seeing as that's your business.
Yeah. So an e-fuel is also called an electrofuel. The idea is you take renewable energy, power, so for your power, you need water and you need CO2 as the kind of three feedstocks. How the process works is you basically take a load of renewable energy, you use all of that power to split water through electrolysis, and then you combine that with CO2, and that combination of green hydrogen plus CO2 gives you something called green methanol, which is the fuel, the e-fuel that we are developing.
And if you look at it, I've done stories with big companies, and we'll talk about kind of your background in a second. But people have been experimenting for a while, right? So there've been things like they're trying to, have wind turbines in the desert that spin, and then you use carbon to do it. We've looked at people using biological sources to try and extract, the alcohol, the ethanol from that. Um, but in essence, if it doesn't have the clean energy part, right, whether it's water, whether it's air, whether it's solar, whatever, would you still say it was an e-fuel?
So there's a really clear split in the SAF world. So you have biosaf and then you
Right,
have eSAF.
right.
The shorthand is biosaf is cheaper today but doesn't scale.
Yeah,
E-fuel's more expensive today but tremendous potential to scale. Um, yeah, so and to make an e-fuel, it has to be derived from 100% renewables.
yeah. So the big thing with SAF, which sustainable aviation fuel, there are trials of it, right? It's been going on for a while. There's
Yeah.
been a few flights. We've covered it on our news sites. Um, the e-fuel thing, apart from sort of, and you can correct me on this, but you know, the press releases that come across my desk, it's all kind of like little randomized trials. People have, maybe put it in a tuk-tuk or taken it on a small sort of car. Where would you say the two areas are, this biofuels and this e-fuels
Yeah.
right now? in terms of kind of their their realistic potential.
Yeah. So maybe starting with the potential. So when you look at hard to abate industries, that's aviation, that's shipping, that's chemicals. To decarbonize these industries at scale, the only plausible technologies that exist to do that are carbon capture and storage
Yep.
or e-fuels. So, and when you look at all those segments, 60% of the emissions by energy end use globally are from those four sectors. So you have to, the end state is e-fuels have to be the answer. So that's really why we started the business to decarbonize heavy industry.
So you said just a moment ago, you gave a good explanation why people have been going for these biofuels because they're easy to get right now.
Yeah.
Um, do you envision a future where they're both going sort of in tandem, a bit like kind of the years of you know
So it'll be so the way this is going to work is if you so starting today there is zero eSAF in production at
yeah
commercial scale,
yeah
zero. The demand, however, is significant. So from 2030, there'll be a demand for eSAF of about 750,000 tons
wow
from a zero base today. How this will work is between then and now, biosaf will dominate because
right
that
yeah.
is but then the feedstock, it's a feedstock constrained market. You just don't have the feedstock available for the demand that exists. And then we will switch and transition over to eSAF from 2030 onwards, and that will be the kind of dominant technology.
Are you friends with the biosaf lot? Are you, or is it because you're both trying to do the right thing? But I suppose it's kind of like two different technologies, isn't it?
Also, we don't actually compete with them. That's the
Oh,
reality. So the way that the regulation works is you have targets for both categories, for eSAF and for biosaf.
yeah,
And you have different penalties associated with not hitting those targets. So
gotcha.
we don't compete at all with Biosaf. Our competition is eSAF technologies.
Okay, let's get to how this all began because we just before we recorded, you told me that you weren't a chemist, and
Yeah,
but you have one on the team. So your background is you've come from the other side. You've come from analyzing markets, right? You've been
correct.
in the kind of like advisory role. So why set up an e-fuel company when, as we said before we started recording,
Mm,
the big oil and gas giants have been exploring this for a while. I've
yeah,
done interviews with companies like Siemens, BP, and all that. They're all in this market. So why
mm,
would you do a startup in this field?
yeah. Two very simple realizations. One, so I was involved in my previous life at a firm called Guidehouse, which was deeply entrenched in developing the regulatory frameworks and the rules governing, in particular, green hydrogen production.
Yeah,
And I was also doing a bunch of work with major oil and gas companies, and I think we saw two things. One was that the regulation was coming, which would drive significant
yeah,
demand.
yeah,
The penalties were there to make the business case work. And two, that the oil and gas guys were nowhere to be seen. So there would be a temporary gap in the market
yeah.
for the first movers, where the projects would be too small to get their attention, and they didn't want to have the threat of cannibalizing their core products. So we decided to launch as a first mover to capture that opportunity.
That is a funny thing, isn't it? Because if you look at it, it's the same as I don't know if Kodak is still going, but Kodak should have seen digital is coming.
Yeah.
Now, it's pretty obvious all of the oil and gas companies know that the days of fossil fuels are going, but
Mm.
fuel itself, in that kind of form that we use, will continue, but it'll just be trying to get it without emissions. So, why is it you think that they've not really gone for it? Because I've run stories, and you work there, you know the score. They've done projects, haven't they, for years?
I mean, they've done projects. They've applied for government grant funding and
Yeah,
all the rest of
yeah,
it to
yeah.
to to show that they're doing stuff. But if you look at actually who's doing the projects and advancing, it's all infrastructure startups. Oil
Right.
and gas are absolutely nowhere to be seen. And one of the reasons for that is, they're playing a kind of game of chicken with the regulators.
Yeah,
If I take eSAF, They're called obligated parties, but basically the companies that have to hit those targets are effectively oil and gas players.
Right.
And they are quite stringent targets with significant penalties. And it all kicks off in 2030. And they're playing a game with the European regulators saying there's no fuel on the market, push these
Yeah.
targets back, get rid of these
Yeah. Gotcha.
penalties to show that, to make the regulators move. So it's a bit of a game of chicken.
But you disagree with that then, clearly, if you've set up your business. You believe you can do this.
We believe we can do it, and we've made significant progress in the last 4 years. And we believe that the players who will be the first movers, as we saw within multiple industries, renewables, ethanol, it's always the startups. The
Yeah.
regulation changes, startups enter the fray, and the kind of incumbents are slow to pick up.
So what do you do? Tell us what your company does. Where first of all, where do you get your energy from, and where do you get your feedstock fuel from? Because you said at the beginning you need, I think you said water and then some sort of carbon source, correct?
Yes, yes. So when we started the business, the exam question that we asked was, okay, regulations coming, gap in the market. What is the most effective way to position as a producer at the bottom of the cost curve?
Yeah,
When you look at the levelized cost of production of e-fuels, 70% comes from your power, your renewable energy. So to be successful, you have to decimate the cost of your power.
gotcha.
So what we did was we came up with what we call the behind the meter model, which is a fancy way of saying develop and build your own renewable energy on the same site where you produce your green fuels.
Ah, okay.
And the reason for that is twofold. One is economics. If you do that, you don't pay transmission fees, so you cut the power
Yeah,
cost by
yeah.
half. And two is you are fully compliant with the regulation to be classified as an e-fuel under the European RFNBO definitions, because you can demonstrate that when you're producing green hydrogen, the wind is blowing, the sun is shining, it's all happening in the same place. So that's called additional power.
So you've basically done uh, build your own renewable energy source at the same time as make your fuel. So we'll talk about the renewable source in a second. What about your fuel stock? What's your carbon coming from?
So to be fully compliant, you have to capture CO2 from what's called a biogenic source. It's a
Right.
shorthand for kind of good CO2, so non-fossil CO2.
Okay.
So we have projects in Texas. One of our projects there is called Rattlesnake Gap. It's a 23,000 acre site. And for that particular project, we capture CO2 from an ethanol producer, which comes out very, very
Okay.
pure, 95%. So it's very cheap to capture. And we use that as our feedstock. And we have a
So,
20-year binding
yeah.
contract producer.
So that's the, but what's the original source? For example, um, you're what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I need to make sure the viewers and listeners get this.
Yeah.
The carbon source you're using is already from an industrial process, correct?
So when you make corn, when you make ethanol through the fermentation of corn,
Yeah,
the byproduct of that process is CO2.
gotcha.
And that CO2 is a waste product and it's classified as a biogenic source. So we capture that.
So the original stock, the source is corn in that
Sure.
case, right? So that's what I'm trying to get to. Is this always going to come from some sort of original uh, biological source? So whether that be corn or wheat or it doesn't matter what it is,
Yeah.
there's an organic element in this pathway.
I mean, the idea behind why they chose to kind of define various biogenic sources
Yeah,
is to not incentivize the wrong behavior. Because if I go and approach a refinery and saying, "Hey, you've
that's what I
got
was going to say. Yeah, exactly.
a bunch of CO2 here, can I capture that?"
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You're effectively incentivizing the
Or
production of
digging.
oil and gas. So you're
Yeah.
kind of shooting yourself in the foot.
So that's where the differential is. That
Yeah,
basically, that's what I was going to say. Couldn't you just go to oil and gas refinery and go, "Hey, give me that stuff. I'll take your CO2."
exactly that. Yeah,
So there are rules to stop that.
exactly. So exactly that.
So where's your power source? What are you doing? Are you using wind turbines, solar panels? What are you doing?
So this is a very competitive space, and these fuels are relatively expensive today. So we choose the cheapest possible renewable energy technologies. So that is onshore wind and solar.
Right.
And the trick is you've got to go to the places in the world which have the absolute best world-class resources.
Yeah,
And we started the business in Europe. We quickly realized that Finland had the best renewables
of
and
course. Yeah,
combination
yeah, yeah.
of biogenic sources of CO2 from pulp and paper. And then in the US, we went out to Texas, and that has amazing wind, 50% capacity factor, which is equivalent to an offshore wind farm at the cost of
Wow.
an onshore wind farm.
Right. So you've got how many sites now running?
So we've got four. Three of them are will produce e-methanol, and
Yeah,
two of them are in Texas. One is in Finland, and then we have one UK-based eSAF project.
I was going to say. So you're a British company, though, right?
We're Irish,
Oh, you're
sadly.
Irish. Okay.
Yes.
Your accent has fooled me then.
Yeah.
So, in terms of where this technology will go, is it limited so that, I mean, I don't know, could you do it in Gujarat? Could you do it in Africa? Or is this something that you're looking at kind of you need the crop source, you need
Yeah.
transmission system, you need power systems, and at present is
Mhm.
more of a developed Western thing? Because that would be something that would hold it back.
Yeah. So from a fundamentals perspective, well, let me start. So the first move is these projects are incredibly challenging to pull together. They take
Right.
about between 6 to 8 years to develop. Our strategy was to use boring, proven technologies and do this in OECD countries for the first
Gotcha.
project.
Right. Okay. There we go.
And Texas is the best place on the planet to do this for two reasons. One is the permitting environment is great. They like to get things done.
Yeah.
And two, the resources are fantastic. And three, the incentives in the US are the most powerful in the world. So on our first project, we have access to $1.5 billion of tax credits.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
So while fundamentally Brazil should be an absolute market leader,
Yeah.
doing business in Brazil, challenging for the first projects. Longer
Gotcha.
term, fantastic.
Yeah.
Same with North Africa. We would love to do projects there, but we believe that the first projects will come from Texas.
Right. And in terms of your own footprint for this, right? So obviously you're going to have some sort of plant, whether that, and you said you're going to have a setup. So what are you doing to try and reduce your own footprint in your either your embodied carbon or where you're sourcing
Yeah.
your wind farms and your solar? Because if the solar panels are coming from China, then flipping heck, it's all kind of start that. And it's not to, demean what you're trying to do, but this is an
Yeah.
important part of where this stuff goes because there's no point chopping down 10,000 trees to say I'm going to save 500 trees.
Yes, yes, completely. And that is exactly how they've defined the rules to make sure that the right set of behaviors don't end up doing exactly what you're describing. So the way that the regulation is structured is they incentivize the lower the carbon intensity of the fuel,
Right.
the more valuable it is. So we have an incentive built in um, to the regulation to reduce our CI as much as we possibly can. And right now, we can deliver a 93% reduction relative to diesel. So if our
Yeah.
fuel goes into a ship, or an 85% reduction relative to jet fuel.
So, and in terms of what you're doing to try and cut your own footprint of the actual site, are you trying to source locally for your panels and things like that, or is there still basically you're factoring in your embodied carbon because you're going to have to get it from abroad from somewhere?
So when you pull together one of these projects, you have to deliver what's called a life cycle analysis, which
Yeah.
basically tracks the carbon content of all the full end-to-end chain. It's called well to
The
wake,
wind turbine, the pump,
everything.
the whole thing. Yeah.
The whole thing is tracked. So we have to make those decisions based on the lowest carbon intensity that we can possibly achieve.
What's the future for this stuff? So you said you've got these plants and they're making stuff. Have you got any clients for them yet who are taking it and actually not doing a test, but using these e-fuels to power a boat or a plane or a car, whatever you're doing?
Yeah. So we don't have anything in production. So none of our projects are up and running. The first one will be Rattlesnake Gap in Texas, which will be producing fuel in 2030.
Okay.
That project is a 126,000 ton per year e-methanol project. And on that project, we were the first company in the world to sign long-term fixed price binding offtake with a shipping customer last
Right.
month. So it's very, very new. And the challenge that we have is we have to persuade customers to buy the fuel or to lock in to buying the fuel 4 years before the
I
fuel.
was gonna say now that, now that having been in business for a while myself, if you said to me, Sumit, do you know what? I've got a great deal for you. I can't prove it to you right now, but in 4 years' time, just
Yeah.
sign up for here. I would say, Felix, you know
Yeah.
where to go.
Thanks, but no thanks. No, I think that is one of the biggest. So we have two major challenges when we have to try to find a customer. Number one is they have to buy the fuel 4 years in advance, and number two is they need to buy it on a 10-year fixed price contract,
Right, that's huge.
which is a significant balance sheet liability for them and a huge, huge bet that they need to place. So those are the two biggest challenges in selling this fuel. Why do we need that? It's because we need to take our this project to a bank to get third-party project financed. And the idea is fix the inputs. So we have a
Yeah,
20-year contract on our feedstock,
yeah.
fix the outputs with the customers, and de-risk the project so that a bank can step in and get this thing financed.
I assume you've done the tests. So have you proved the fuel works? Have you done sort of batch tests or put it into anything and what's the performance like?
Mm. So the fuel is proven, the technologies are proven. The only difference is that there was never a customer. So if you look at the
Right,
technology readiness level of our e-methanol project, which goes into ships, the technology is 8 or 9. So it's not a technology question. All of it is proven. It's really the fact that there was never a customer before.
right. So in terms of your testing, what have you done? Have you just done it yourselves and put it into small boats, or have you just done the chemical analysis to show the fuel is cleaner?
So we have so there are plenty of trials and proven pilots of people using e-methanol in ships.
Yeah,
Maersk has been sailing around all the world, on
yeah.
their Laura Maersk boat. So all of that is proven. What we've come up with is a kind of differentiated way to produce this fuel in the most cost competitive and compliant way. So that's
So
really our
okay, so
innovation.
what you're saying is what you're producing is almost industry standard anyway. It's been tested out.
Completely. Yeah,
Right. So what you're saying is the way you can do it is cheaper and better and easier. Okay.
exactly.
You said a few moments ago, you gave some stats, and I've forgotten what you said, but what did you say about how much cleaner you expect it to be in terms of its carbon intensity, these fuels?
So you so 93% compared to what's called heavy fuel oil, which is effectively diesel for ships,
Right.
or 85% relative to jet fuel.
So that's 85% cleaner in
Correct.
for us to understand.
So you reduce the emissions by 85%.
So there
Exactly.
will always be emissions for these fuels, and I think that's the case for most of these things.
Yeah.
So, is there, probably this is projecting maybe 10 years ahead, but do you conceive or conceptualize a way of actually getting rid of that last kind of 7% or whatever it is to produce a proper zero emission e-fuel?
I mean, yes, it always depends at what price.
Yeah.
You
But the
could
technology could do it, you're saying.
completely, you could theoretically, we produce our methanol, we put it into a ship. The ship produces emissions that
Yeah.
come from combusting the fuel, and you could, in theory, capture those emissions and recycle them into making more fuels.
Yeah. But
But
there's
uh,
a cost.
but there's a cost. Yeah.
So let's talk about that before we end. Obviously, I said right at the beginning, people are sort of talking about jet fuel and whether fuels will be there for us to take our trips this summer. Now, there's part of this is complete pants, right? It's like, hey, you could go and have a holiday anywhere, and it's that. But there is a serious element of goods and shipping, and the actual there was a story just today about fertilizer and the base fuels and CO2 that we need in loads of things that we don't think. So there's an industrial case for flying and shipping, which is being affected right now by this Iran war. In terms of where you see this, obviously you can't affect the market now, but by 2030, 2035, do you hope, or can you actually say to me with some confidence that these e-fuels could start to take away some of this volatility? Because
Mm,
I'm assuming what you're saying is you could make it locally eventually, right? So
yeah,
countries could make it themselves and have
absolutely.
their own sources.
Absolutely. So I think whenever you see a price shock due to war, energy security and resilience of supply becomes the kind of key focus. And the benefit of e-fuels is you can produce them domestically. So you can take ownership, take away that volatility. So by 2030, if targets are hit in Europe, 1% of all the fuel will be coming from eSAF for
Right,
aviation.
right.
So it will be a slow transition because these projects are,
Yeah, I get it.
you know, tough to pull together, but it will come.
Would it happen here in the UK? You said like you've got something in the UK, but you haven't got sites. Is that right? Have I got that right?
So we do have a site in the UK. So we have an eSAF methanol to jet project.
Right.
And the idea is produce the feedstock where it makes sense, the e-methanol in Texas and in Finland, but then
Yeah.
do the last step to upgrade into jet fuel in the UK. Why the UK? Because the regulatory framework and government support is really strong. So we see that the most attractive first projects for eSAF will be based in the UK for
But
methanol to jet.
okay, gotcha. But would you be going to a farm or something like that in the UK eventually to try and get the biogenic source from here, or do you think it'd still be there'll be some sort of element of shipping it, which obviously involves carbon, getting the stuff from
So
America or Finland to England?
So it again comes down to cost. So the way that we do it, producing the feedstock in Texas,
Yeah,
last piece upgrade in the UK is half the cost of doing everything in the UK.
that's
So
crazy, isn't it?
so it's a big
That's
cost difference.
crazy.
Yeah. But if you do it
Sure.
like this, you get the
Yeah,
jobs, you get the high value jobs, kind of
yeah,
advanced manufacturing in the refinery based in the UK at the
gotcha.
lowest cost to the consumer.
What's your hope by 2050, the magical 2050? You said 1% maybe by 2030 or something like that. Will I actually fly in a plane that's got an e-fuel in its tanks?
By 2050, let's hope so. Yeah. So by 2050, 80% of all the fuel will be derived from e-fuels. So that's the kind of trajectory you're going to see from
Wow.
1% in 2030 to 80% by 2050.
So, and who's predicting this apart from you, obviously?
So those are the targets that they put in place. So they've said,
Okay.
right,
Wow.
we'll start with a small target and we'll ratchet up over time. So as costs come down, we can
Yeah.
scale this fuel up. And that's kind of how we see the transition. Eventually these e-fuels will compete head to head with
Yeah.
fossil, but it will take time.
The elephant in the room is people. You know what I'm going to say now. Probably some people say, "Why are you doing all of this?" Right? Because we should be flying less, right? There are other emissions to do with flights and everything like that as well.
Hmm.
What's your answer to that? Because some would say, actually, what we should do is we're talking now online. We could do lots more business like this. Do we need to fly? Yes, we could take holidays at home as well. So when people say to you, well, why are you bothering, investing in what some environmentalists will call a very damaging industry? What was your response?
Yeah. So I would say, you know, not taking a flight here or there is kind of like moving the deck chairs around on the Titanic. The end state is for 60% of all the world's emissions, they come from heavy industry.
Yeah.
The only way to decarbonize these industries today is with e-fuels. We have to start, and the only way to start is to build the first projects. This is an infrastructure play. This is not a technology play, this is pure projects. Our first project in Texas will be the first commercial scale e-fuel project in the world, is the size of Manhattan Island. So these
Wow.
projects take a
Huge.
while to pull
Yeah.
together, but the scale that is required, we have to get started now.
Brilliant. Well, look, I think you're doing something very interesting. When are you going to start building in Texas?
So we will take what's called financial investment decision
Yeah.
as soon as the back end of this year. So at that point, we can start the proper construction. We've already
Okay.
started digging foundations for wind turbines and
Yeah.
digging holes to extract water and that kind of thing. But the real construction starts early next year.
And you think how long for a build? A couple of years or more? Or more?
3 years to build.
3 years to build, and then production straight away.
Correct. Yeah. It's
Okay.
a bit of a ramp up, 6 months to kind of, yeah, but it's
All
production
right.
in 2030.
Okay. If we're still doing the podcast in the 4 years, give me a shout. I'll come and see it.
All right. Well, pleasure. Thank you so much.
Listen, No, it's been a real pleasure, Felix. Thank you very much. I think you've explained it brilliantly to our audience. So thanks for your time today and best of luck.
Great, thank you.
Let us know what you think, audience. Do you believe in e-fuels? I think they are part of the future. Get in touch on social media. My thanks to Rob for production this week. See you on the next episode of the Net Hero Podcast.
You've just heard the Net Hero Podcast from FutureNetZero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. FutureNetZero.com. Better business, better planet.